Well, hello there, reefers and future reefers. I'm Bana Sophia. Thank you for popping by my channel. We're going to be talking about my experience with the Studio 12-gallon all-in-one reef tank, and also the complete saltwater startup kit offered by Reef Casa. So I'm really excited because today is the big day. We're going to be getting this tank wet and getting this party started. We'll touch on a number of different topics. We'll talk about the stand that I'm using. We'll talk about some electrical considerations, the aquascape, the salt we'll be using, the sand. We'll take a sneak peek at the back chambers of this tank so you can check out the filtration system. And then we'll also talk about the beneficial bacteria that we'll be adding to get a jump start on the nitrogen cycle in this tank. All right, let's talk about the stand. When choosing your stand for a tank, factors to consider include the dimensions of the tank and the weight of the tank with water. Remember that 1 gallon of water weighs about 8 pounds, so the Studio 12 will weigh roughly 100 pounds. With bigger tanks, this can be a much bigger challenge, but since this tank is small, there are a lot of options. It may be light enough to set it up on a countertop or on a sturdy desk. If you want to take it to the next level though, I believe Reef Casa has a custom tank that looks really nice. You can check out their website for more information on that. In my case, I'm using an IKEA Kallax shelf that I was previously using for my BioCube 16 for nearly 5 years. This tank fits perfectly on the IKEA shelf. It's definitely a good option that I would recommend. Please note though, if you do use this type of shelf, make sure it's positioned with the correct orientation with the longer stretches on the top and bottom, so they're resting on the side pieces to help distribute the weight of the full tank. If you had it turned the other way, then the weight from the tank would be on screws, and I would just be worried about whether that would be able to stand the test of time. As you can see, I did add door inserts for hiding my equipment and supplies. The inserts do have a back to them inside, so you do just need to cut a hole in the back for cords. And then I also added some handles to make it look nice and match my decor. You may want to add some protectant as well, like polyacrylic, to prevent water damage to the top of the shelf. I did not do that on this stand, and it's held up pretty well, but I did use it for one of my other tanks, and it's been really nice to have the extra protection from inevitable spills during water changes and things. Next, let's talk about some electrical considerations when setting up a tank. You want to make sure that you're setting up your tank fairly close to a power supply, since there are a lot of components that you'll need to be plugging in. Because you'll have so much equipment to plug in, you'll want a good power strip with a surge protector. I use this one by Trip Light. It has 6 outlets with individual on and off switches, which makes it really easy to turn things on and off for feeding and water changes. And then there's one outlet that's always on, and I use that one for my lights so I don't accidentally cut off the power to my lights and lose my settings. When you place your power strip and plug in your equipment, it's important to remember that water and electricity don't mix, so you need to consider safety, and there are a couple of things you need to do. First, you need to make sure you include drip loops. This means that any power cords or wires that come out of your tank should dip down below the level of the outlet and then loop back up before they're plugged in. This is so that if water splashes out of the tank and onto the cord, it'll run down along the cord and drip off onto the floor rather than running into the outlet. Secondly, you'll likely need to add GFCI protection to your outlets near your tank. GFCI stands for Ground Fault Circuit Interrupter. You usually see GFCI outlets in kitchens and bathrooms due to using electricity near water sources. These are the outlets that have the little test and reset button on them. So basically, GFCIs protect people from electric shock in wet areas. When I first set up my tanks, I used GFCI adapters, like the one you can see here next to the power strip. Then, as time went on, I had an electrician come upgrade our outlets to GFCI outlets. So remember, GFCIs protect people from electric shock in wet areas, whereas surge protectors guard appliances or electronics against sudden increases in voltage. So you'll need both things. To learn more about these and other safety considerations, I highly recommend checking out the article Basic Aquarium Safety by BRS. I will add a link below. All right, what about aquascaping the Studio 12? The Reef Casa saltwater starter kit includes 9 to 10 pounds of dry rock. In my case, there were 2 really nice pieces. I played around with them and decided that they would work for me as is to create my scape once I found a good way to arrange them. I really like a pretty basic natural looking scape which can serve as a blank canvas for my corals, but some people might want to get more creative and use a hammer and chisel to break up and then glue the rock back together to create something unique. You can check out Tia's scape in her Studio 12 on the Reef Casa website for ideas. Now, a few tips when you're creating your aquascape. You can cut the box that the tank came in to the size of the display, so you can try different configurations without worrying about damaging the glass of the tank. You want to make sure you come up with something that's visually appealing to you. You also want to make sure you leave space around the outside of the scape for water flow and also for cleaning the sand bed and for cleaning the algae off your glass. If possible, it is good to include a place for your fish to hide, but you also want to design it so you can get them back out again if needed. With my first tank, I had a cave, and with the way I glued my scape together inside the tank, I couldn't get it back out again without destroying it. So once fish or other livestock went in the tank, they usually couldn't come back out again. You also want to consider how light will hit the rock and your future corals. Remember, most corals need light to grow. Best to look at the rock from the top down, from the perspective of your light, to check this. Looking down on your rock like this also allows you to imagine how your future reef will look in top-down pictures. I totally plan my tanks with regard to how they will look in photos in the future. All right, so let's take a look at the tank. I wanted to take this opportunity to show you the rear chambers of the tank, since it's an all-in-one, so you can get a sense of what the filtration system will be like. I'm hoping I'll be able to capture it here with my phone without too much bumping around for you guys. So basically, there are 3 chambers in the back of this tank. The water will enter the rear chamber here, and it'll go into this first chamber. Normally, you would have this little shelf in there. This is the filter floss holder, and you would put your filter floss on top. If you get the complete saltwater setup, it comes with some pre-cut floss, but you can also buy your own floss and cut it to the shape, and this will make a really nice template for that. After the water goes through the filter floss, then you have an area underneath where you can put your filter media, such as your activated carbon. If you're using like ChemiPure or Purigen, that might be a good place to put it as well. The water will go through there, and then the water exits that chamber and goes into the middle chamber down at the bottom, and I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but there's a little gap down at the bottom. That's where it'll enter the middle chamber. The middle chamber is where you'll want to place your heater. It's where I'll be keeping my bio blocks or bacteria hotel blocks that were included in the saltwater setup kit. Or if you were using something like the Marine Pure or Seachem Matrix Media, this would probably be the best chamber to put that in. Next, the water is going to flow over this lower baffle here and into the third chamber where you'll have your return pump set up. And I also have the thermometer probe in there for now. I'm not sure if that's where I'll keep it. When I set up the pump, I did I attached the plumbing hose and the nozzle, but I did need to actually adjust the length of that tubing there. I just cut probably about 1.5 inches off or so. So if you are setting it up, you may need to measure it and cut it to fit. But that was pretty quick and easy to do. I think those are all the essentials. Then you have the return nozzle here. I think that they do offer an upgraded return nozzle that's a random flow generator, but this is just the basic one here, and it should suit my needs. All right, the next step is adding our sand. So the saltwater setup kit does include 6 pounds of dry sand, specially measured to give you a 1-inch sand bed for this tank. Typically, you would rinse dry sand, but the manual seems to be saying that this sand does not need to be rinsed. So you may want to just double check that when using the Reef Casa sand. Now, in my case, I've tried several types of sand, and I'm just not a big fan of dry sand. I've found that Carib Sea Ocean Direct Live Sand works best for me. I'd already picked some up before I knew the kit would include the sand, and then I just saw some information from BRS indicating their test tank, which used Ocean Direct, really outperformed many of their other sands and methods. So after a lot of consideration, I decided to stick with my original plan to use Ocean Direct Live Sand. I'm going to go ahead and add it. Remember, anytime you use live sand, you don't rinse it because you don't want to wash off the beneficial bacteria in the sand. You may notice that Ocean Direct sand is not as wet as other live sands. It's just slightly moist, and that's totally normal for this sand. All right, so it didn't really work for me to show adding the sand because I was totally blocking the camera with my arm, so I'm sorry about that, but I did just use a measuring cup and added the sand to the tank. Added enough to try and get about a 1-inch sand bed all around. You can see I did get some on the Aquascape. No worries about that because when we add the water, we'll then be able to get the sand back off the rock and it will be fine. Also, just a reminder, you always want to add your rock first and then the sand like I did. That's because you want to make sure that there's no sand underneath the rock because you might end up adding livestock in the future that may dig in the sand, and you don't want it to undermine the sand beneath the rock, causing it to topple over. All right. Next up, we have the water. The saltwater setup kit included a bag of Aquaforest reef salt, which I've never used before. I researched it a bit and it looks great. The parameters are in the ranges I like for my tanks, and it's cool because you can look up the ICP test results for your batch. Here's my batch. I do plan to use it, and I actually may switch all my tanks over to it, but not yet. That's because anytime I start a new tank, I do not mix my own water. For me, it was too much in the beginning to learn how to mix the water correctly along with everything else I was trying to learn. I didn't have the buckets, extra pump for mixing, or RODI filter, or even know how to accurately use a refractometer or hydrometer yet. Plus, you need a lot more water for the first fill, so you need a bigger bucket than you would usually use for just your water change water. So I didn't want to buy it if it was just for a one-time use. Anyway, saltwater options I've used instead of mixing my own for my first fill. I have bought pre-mixed saltwater made by my local fish store. I've used Nutri-Seawater, which is ocean water, which has beneficial bacteria added to it. And I've used Imaginarium Pacific Ocean water that you can get from Petco. And that does not have the added beneficial bacteria. With this tank for my first fill, I'll be using the dry rock, the Ocean Direct live sand, the Imaginarium water, and the Reef Casa beneficial bacteria, along with ammonium chloride. I'm going to go ahead and add the water, and then I'll add the full bottle of ammonium chloride, and then the full bottle of beneficial bacteria. I did want to mention how I add the water to the tank the first time. So I do use my siphon, my Python siphon that I normally use for water changes, along with the siphon bulb that starts the siphon. You elevate the box of water up high so that it can actually flow and have the siphon that you need. And then you just start the siphon by squeezing on the bulb. I direct the water onto the Aquascape so to minimize the stirring up of the sand, so hopefully it won't get too cloudy in this initial step. So the directions said to fill the tank up until the return chamber in the back is about 1 inch below the baffle. And it looks like I tried to aim for that, but it looks like it settled in more after I stopped adding the water. And so it looks like the level might be a little bit high. So I'll probably just need to take some kind of a container and take out some extra water. But let's see what happens when I turn the pump on and see if that adjusts the level at all. Okay, wow, that is a really powerful pump. I'm gonna just reach in there and aim it downward a little bit so it's not breaking the surface quite so much. Oh, indeed, it totally dropped the level of the water in the back chamber. Let me see if you can see this without dropping my phone in the tank. So after I added the water last night and turned on the pumps and adjusted the water level, I decided to just let the tank run overnight. I wanted to let the sand settle down a little bit. I also wanted to let the temperature come up to the right range. So I turned the heater on to 78 degrees and just let it sit for the night. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the next step. I want to first check and make sure that the salinity level of the tank is in the right range. Really, I want my tank to be between 1.024 and 1.026. And you know, I use the Imaginarium salt water, so I would just want to test it out and make sure that the range is correct. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that now. I have a couple of nice pieces of equipment here that make it easy to test. This is my Milwaukee refractometer. I'm going to go ahead and add my water sample there. I already calibrated the refractometer before I started filming. And there's the result for the salinity level of the water in the tank. The next thing I wanted to test and show you before adding the Reef Casa beneficial bacteria and ammonium chloride is just to show you the parameters of the water right now with just the Imaginarium water and the Ocean Direct live sand that I added last night. So for that, I'm going to be showing you with my API Aquaspin. It's a really cool piece of equipment that I splurged on last year, and it makes it really easy to test all of the parameters. You open the testing compartment like this, you get one of the test discs like this, and then you just take your sample of tank water and add it. See if I can do this without being too clumsy here while I'm filming. So it's a tiny little hole, you have to get it in here. All right, so I've added my sample, and then I'm going to put the disc in the tester. Then you have to put this disc cover on, close the lid, and then just press tap to start. It's pretty slick. It takes about 2 minutes for it to measure all of the parameters, and you'll see what we get. All right, so you can see the results here. Let me light that back up again. So with just the Ocean Direct live sand and the Imaginarium water, you can see the readings that we have so far, and keeps dimming really quickly before I can read it. So what we have here is alkalinity is 153. We have to convert that to DKH, so I'll do that in a minute. pH 8.1, phosphates are 0.1, calcium 390, magnesium, I think it says 1069, ammonia is 0.1, nitrite is 0.3, and nitrate is 0. And so that's probably has to do with the fact that it was the live sand we used. It's already got some beneficial bacteria and probably some organics and things that came from the sand. Now that we know that the tank is in the right temperature range, around 78 degrees, the salinity is 1.025, we are ready to go ahead and add our Reef Casa beneficial bacteria and ammonium chloride. First, you're going to shake the bottles thoroughly, and then you're going to add the entire contents of the ammonium chloride to the tank. This will provide food for the beneficial bacteria. Then you're going to also shake up the beneficial bacteria bottle and also add the entire contents of that bottle to the tank. And you want to be adding these to the display. You may notice that the tank will get a little bit cloudy when you do this. That's totally normal. You don't have to worry. It's just part of the process. Once you do that, Reef Casa says that with our product, the cycle typically takes about 2 weeks. They recommend that you test the ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate levels every few days. I've waited about 5 minutes or so. Now I want to do the final test for today, and that is to test what the levels are in the tank after adding the Reef Casa beneficial bacteria and ammonium chloride. I figured you guys might be curious about this too, so let's take a look. So I'm collecting the sample. Need to turn the tester back on. I'll add the sample to the disc. And let's see what happens. All right, interesting. There we go. So you can see the ammonia happened. It is measuring at 4.2, which is perfect. So if you're experienced with the nitrogen cycle and cycling a tank, you know that you do want to start out with the ammonia that feeds the bacteria. You don't want the ammonia level to be over 5 because that can stall the cycle and make it so you need to do a water change to reduce it. But a level of 4.2 is good. Now, according to the directions, we just want to test the ammonia and nitrite and nitrate levels every few days to check the progress. You want the ammonia and nitrite levels to go down to 0. And then the nitrate level is going to increase during the course of your cycling of the tank. That's normal. And then the important thing to keep in mind is you cannot add any fish or livestock at this point to your tank. You really just need to be patient and wait for your tank to cycle to make sure it's safe to add your livestock. I'll post another video to show the progress of the cycle. Reef Casa says that with their beneficial bacteria and ammonium chloride that they provide, to expect the cycle to take about 2 weeks time. So this is the best time to really be planning for the future, researching and deciding how you're going to stock the tank going forward. I'll give you some tips and suggestions for where to look for information and things that I find helpful in my next video. For now, I have some additional tips that I just want to mention as you're cycling your tank. Be sure when you're planning for saltwater, you also plan to get some fresh water for topping off the tank as water evaporates. I'll talk more about this in a future video, but just make sure you have some available. For now, you want to either get some extra RODI water from your local fish store, or you could filter it yourself if you already have a filter, or you can pick up a jug of distilled water. I buy mine from my local grocery store. Now, the other thing to know is when you're first cycling your tank with a beneficial bacteria product, you don't want to use any filter floss or other filter media in the tank, because you don't want the beneficial bacteria to colonize those things, and you don't want to filter out the ammonia and nitrites using any filter media. You want to just let the tank do its thing. So no filter media at all at this point. You also want to make sure you're not using a skimmer or a UV light. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier is that you want to check and make sure once your tank is filled up that the tank and stand are level. If it was not level, then you can use shims to level the stand that your tank is on. This is really important because you don't want any undue stress on the seams of your tank over time. My tank is level, it's good, so we're all set, but I think there are videos out there if you do need to do things to level your tank. You can find videos on how to do it. And then the final thing is, if you do have the mesh lid for the tank, I would recommend going ahead and putting that back on the tank. For me, it's really important because I do have 2 golden retrievers that shed a lot. And I also have a cat that I'd be worried that it would try and mess around with the tank. So good to keep the lid on now during the cycling process. All right, guys, thank you so much for sticking with it until the end. I know that was a lot of information. I hope it was helpful. I'm really looking forward to watching this Studio 12 tank progress. I hope you are too. Please like and subscribe so you can follow along. If you have any experience with the Studio 12 tank, I would love to hear your experience, so please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you're a new reefer and you have any questions at all about the setup of a new tank, please don't hesitate to ask. You can find me here on my YouTube channel, also on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much again, and happy reefing. Okay, so I am really excited. Today's the big day that we're gonna get this tank wet and get this party started.
Yeah!
All right, so I'm really excited because today is the big day that we're gonna be getting this tank wet and getting this party started.